How do people do introductions?
Who the hell are you?
Okay, this is going to be my third attempt at a video essay. We'll see if I actually post this one. I have watched dozens of Arcane deep dives since the show was released, and while I obviously agree that there is a lot to talk about when it comes to the show, I never really wanted to throw my hat into the ring until I found a topic that I hadn't already seen discussed in length. And I think I finally found the one. I mean, as far as I know. Among the dozens of theories and parallels that I found while watching and rewatching Arcane, this is the one that I just can't get out of my head. After a year and a half, I still haven't been able to disprove it, and it pertains to the very first scene of the show. Now, I have heard the theory that Schnee put together about Powder displaying a lack of sadness or empathy over the loss of her parents in this scene, but I could not disagree more. I love your work, Schnee. Never stop. I disagree with this idea, in part because of the expression of grief on Powder's face when she sees her dead mother, and also because, as a younger sibling myself, it makes sense to me that witnessing her big sister break down was the straw that broke the camel's back. The thing that proved to Powder beyond a doubt that this is indeed as devastating as she feared. Death is a hell of a thing for anyone to process, let alone children, and any denial Powder might have been fighting for in the name of hope was dashed when her protector, her rock, at last fell to her knees in tears. Not only do I personally believe that Powder cares, I think her following attempt to comfort Vi proves it. As a child so young, it's the only thing she knows how to do. She's mimicking what Vi has surely done for her in the past and what their mother likely did before that: physical reassurance. However, the majority of my disagreement with Shanice's take on this scene stems from the fact that by my second watch through, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that these scratchy drawings at the very beginning of the scene are not only not the manifestation of Powder's trigger response, they're in fact Vi's. For anyone feeling skeptical at my initial thesis, I ask you to withhold judgment for just 40 seconds and rewatch this clip with me for the sake of argument. Pause. Now, some of you might have figured out what I'm alluding to, but for those playing catch up, let's make a list of the things we know by this point. 1. The battle has already happened. The bridge is covered in dead. 2. We cut to a POV shot, the head movement and direction of the camera indicating that we are seeing what a living character is seeing. 3. The scratchy drawings that mirror Jinx's in the second and third acts have already been used within the first 15 seconds of the show. Now, as I hit play, I have but one question. Whose fucking eyes are open? Look, I know the camera is framed at Powder's height, but that's because we are about to see Vi's face for the first time through her eyes. Everything else we've already seen could have only been witnessed by Vi herself. She is the one guiding her scared little sister through a literal war zone, and not only that, likely instructed said sister to keep her eyes shut and sing for her, a way to prevent her from seeing the true horror of what they were wandering through. Now, some people might argue that Powder could be peeking through her fingers, or that she must have seen something before covering her eyes when the violence broke out, and that explains why the manifestation is hers, but I disagree for two reasons. Reason A, Powder is keeping tempo. That might sound a little weird, but Powder keeping tempo in the midst of literal warfare, gunfire, and explosions proves to me that she can't see. If she had just witnessed a person shot point blank on the ground, she would have frozen. Second time viewers already know from the fight in the alley that young Powder has a tendency to freeze up in stressful situations. She doesn't want to see violence nor handle it well, but we also know that Vi is a comfort to her, and Vi is holding her hand. So Powder sings and walks blindly, which allows her to separate herself from her environment. She is genuinely as good as blind and deaf, and I think the moment she finally does stop singing proves this further. To begin with, Powder blinks as if it's been a while since she's opened her eyes, but she also doesn't dare look at all until she feels her big sister's lead falter. It's only then that she looks to see what Vi has been witnessing the entire time she led her across the bridge. Reason B. The scratchy drawing is red, which is Vi's chosen color. People associate her with pink, like Jinx with her nails, but it is a physical characteristic that Vi has no control over. I think red would be her personal choice, but moving on. The opening scene on the bridge is the only time in the entire show when one of these dissociative episodes is exclusively portrayed in red. Even during the worst moments in Acts 2 and 3, when Jinx loses herself, the edges of the screen are always either pink or blue. Jinx's colors. But once more, in this scene, they're red. Not only that, I also scoured every scene I could find in Arcane that uses this technique, and there are only 3 extremely brief instances in which Powder sees the color red during any of these episodes. Though, admittedly, a lot of her pink does get really close to red, especially when it comes with imagery of Vi, but it is pink. The first of the 2 uses of red that I don't think count really is the 5 seconds on the bridge when Jinx sees Vi and Caitlyn and the writing draws devil horns on her. The writing is still white here though. And the second is during the Shimmer torture scene with Singe when Jinx once again sees Vi and Caitlyn tormenting her. Both are using the dark red not as ink, but instead as a backlight to emphasize the particularly sinister imagery happening on screen, aka red means evil. The third, however, is a bit more valid, and while I don't believe it disproves anything I've presented so far, Jinx is tormented by a red scratchy demon in the final scene with Silco. But I digress. This moment with the Enforcer killing a beaten down Zonite in cold blood is the very first instance, and only instance, in Act 1 of these scratchy drawings being used. But these marks aren't about how Powder becomes Jinx, they're about how Violet becomes Vi. She never looks at the Enforcers the same. A fact that puts a lot of initial strain on her relationship with Caitlyn. Not only that, every time she returns to this bridge in future episodes, she either hears the distorted sound of gunshots or a reverberating bass implying the threat well enough. This day, this bridge holds Vi's core wound, the one that shapes her worldview going forward. And while, yes, I acknowledge that Powder was, of course, old enough to remember that day and was undoubtedly affected by what happened, her triggers as far as her own personal arc in this story fall more in line with her fear of abandonment and hurting people she cares about. Or more aptly, they come from episode 3.
I told you to stay away!
When she is yet again traumatized at roughly the same age Vi was on the bridge. That is her core wound. Now, someone might also be asking themselves, but uneducated bitch, if these manifestations are really Vi's, then why doesn't she experience them later on throughout the series? First point of interest as far as my opinion goes, I believe that while the story begins from Vi's point of view and lingers there for much of Act 1, they make an intentional shift in the first episode of Act 2 to move some of that focus to Jinx and her story. Thus, it would make sense that we never see things as clearly from Vi's perspective as we do in the first scene. The proverbial passing of the torch is even foreshadowed in the way this is framed, in my opinion, but continuing. The more relevant dispute for this argument is that after the bridge, unlike Powder, Vi healed? Okay, maybe healed is a bit liberal, but in contrast to how Powder was left to deal with the trauma at the end of Act 1, I'm not wrong in spirit. These scratchy drawings only appear when a character, mainly Jinx, is actively being triggered. Whether it's a tiny stutter mid-fight or a bombardment of evil caricatures, the drawings are proof of turmoil, of loss of control. There is only one instance in the show when Vi fully breaks down and outright sobs, in the scene when she finds her parents dead and her world falls apart. But unlike Powder at the end of episode 3, Vander is there. He throws down his gauntlets, the things that initially made Vi and Powder fear him on the bridge, and pulls them into his arms. This is a metaphor. He carries Vi and Powder to safety and subsequently takes them in. Vander raises her, helps Vi take care of Powder, and gives her a home and a purpose. Vi is parentified overnight, to be sure, but it isn't something she can really avoid in Son, nor sees as a bad thing. She wants to take on more responsibility, to prove herself, and no, this isn't exactly healthy per se, but in contrast, Powder is completely abandoned after accidentally killing 3 of the 4 most important people to her in the world. She then stews in her own manic turmoil for years under the influence of a dirtbag who admittedly loves her, but also manipulates her into only sinking deeper into her own pain until it gets so bad he perpetuates fresh trauma for her to endure. With the help of Vander, Milo, Clagger, and even Powder herself, Vi found a way to cope, to fight through her pain, if not for herself, then for the people important to her. But Jinx didn't. She's actively living into an unhealthy, unstable mindset, which is why she sees these hallucinations and images regularly, anytime she gets upset. She never figured out a way to deal with her emotions, only avoid them. So every time she gets triggered, she's instantly feeling as much agony as she did the day she killed her family, the way Vi felt on the bridge. The reason I wanted to start this discussion was because I wanted to know if I'm alone in this belief. Obviously, Arcane's opening scene is packed with subtext and parallels and a million other details I'm sure to have missed, but to me, these few seconds serve as proof that this device, this triggered state and response, is not only the show's way of portraying the manifestation of trauma, it's something that both Powder and Vi are predisposed to from a young age. The only difference in how they handle that devastation and who they become as they get older lies not with who they are fundamentally, but with the support systems that surrounded them during their most pivotal loss. Or at least, that's my uneducated opinion.